1994, after 2 years away, we went back to Aguachica, leaving Andre in Bucaramanga to finish his schooling. My father and I were especially happy to be home. He was confident that things were really beginning to improve, but my mother was afraid. She says now, what I feared most became reality. My father never really believed he would be killed because he said that he had never done anything to hurt anyone. It seemed much more likely that no one of us would be kidnapped, that one of us would be kidnapped, especially me. We discussed how I should behave if this happened. I was to be respectful to any kidnappers, to answer their questions politely, to never try to escape, and to keep faith that I would soon be free. I began attending Jose Maria Campos Serrano Secondary School in a quiet residential area on the outskirts of Aguachica. Dogs and donkeys wandered loose along the hot and dusty road leading to school, which was set among mango, guayaba, and almond trees. The school was like an island of peace in the violent storm that raged in town. Every week, something terrible happened. One weekend, 10 teenagers were killed by the police after they tried to kidnap a farmer. Then, almost the entire population of a nearby village, Patiño, was massacred. After a massacre, people sometimes went to the morgue to see if anyone they knew had been killed. I went inside just once. It is not something I want to describe. I was not afraid. It was just so sad. Many of those people who died were young and had been tortured. Many people gossip about the dead and about what they must have done to deserve such a terrible fate. Pueblo pequeño, infierno grande, my mother says now, which means small village, big hell. Most people believe that the victims were guilty of something, but my brother and I realized that this was not true. When Edgar, a 16-year-old friend of ours, was tortured and murdered along the way with his uncle. Towards the end of 1994, when I was 13 years old, Luis Fernando Rincon was elected mayor of Aguachica, and we were all hopeful that this would bring big changes. But days after Rincon took office, the director of the local hospital, Dr. Jose David Padilla, was murdered. Padilla was likely by many people, and hundreds turned out to follow his coffin through the streets of Aguachica. A lot of us waved while handkerchiefs in protest against the raging violence. It seemed as if anyone who understood for peace and justice was at risk. Anyone who stood for peace and justice was at risk. They still are. Soon afterwards, several armed groups informed Mayor Rincon that he was on the death list. Rincon refused to be intimidated and instead announced that it was time for Aguachica to take a stand against the war. He called together leaders in the town. Doctors, teachers, business people, and my father as well to discuss the situation. They decided to hold a peace referendum. A referendum is when people are asked to vote on a particular question. Our referendum asked, do you reject violence and agree to convert Aguachica into a model oh my god, municipality for peace? That was the dream Rincon had, that Aguachica would set an example for Colombia and show how a town that had been so violent, could become peaceful. The referendum was advertised on radio and television, in the newspaper, and through public meetings and demonstrations. My father organized horseback rides for peace. More than 40 of us, dressed in white, rode in procession through surrounding villages in Aguachica town. We were followed by the papayera, people who played folk music on wind instruments and drums, and by people carrying banners proclaiming Aguachica to be a model municipality of peace. The whole atmosphere of Agua Chica seemed to change, and it certainly had become less violence. More people, more often, I slept through the night without being woken by gunfire. I talked about the referendum with some students at my school, and we decided that young people should also be allowed to take part in the vote. Through my father, I already knew the mayor, so I volunteered to ask him. The mayor agreed, and with help from his office, we launched a youth campaign that involved all the schools and the youth groups in the town. We held ecological walks, dances, and peace marches. Up to 800 children from poor and middle class neighborhoods took part in a massive Camp Out for Peace run by the Scouts. Hundreds came to Hundreds came to peace concerts held in San Roque Park in central Aguachica, where I introduced performers and sometimes played my guitar and sang peace songs. Colombia had never had a referendum like this, so many journalists came from the capital to cover the story. Some asked for me for interviews, and my mother became worried because I started getting a lot of attention. Several priests who had been helping the youth campaign had already been threatened and forced to leave the town. My mother begged me to be careful about anything I said in public, and especially never to criticize anyone directly. Becoming well known meant that some of the other kids made fun of me. "Oh, here comes the pacifist," they would joke. "Here comes the leader." None of it bothered me. My family believed it was important to take care of the community and to do whatever we could to help. Even though I was only 13, I could see that the biggest problem facing us were violence and the war. Peace was needed more than anything else. Of course, it is hard for a child to try to make peace, but trying is the only way anything ever begins. As the referendum grew closer, threats from armed groups increased. Some of the announced some of them announced that no one living in the mountains zones they controlled would be allowed to vote. They denounced the referendum as no way to achieve peace and said all those who did vote would have to suffer the consequences because they would steal the list voters and take their revenge. They would steal the list of the voters and take their revenge. On August 27, 1995, almost 10,400 adults and about 4,000 young people voted to support peace, while fewer than 50 voted against. We thought it was a big success, yet close to 70% of our Chicans did not vote at all. Fear had stopped a lot of people from going to the polls. For a while, the violence in Aguachica calmed down, but by the end of 1995, it was back again, and it was just as fierce. More of those who had spoken out in favor of the referendum were forced to leave the town. Meanwhile, Mayor Rincon decided to appoint me as child mayor of Aguachica because of my work for peace. As a child mayor, I continued to visit schools to talk with students and teachers about creating a more peaceful and tolerant learning atmosphere. We held more youth concerts for peace and organized competitions to see who could write the best peace song. In May 1996, Mayor Rincon asked me if I would represent Aguachica at a workshop being organized by the United Nations Children Fund. On May 23, 1996, I traveled to the meeting at the YMCA camp at Santa Tendris